All right, guys. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but welcome to the May 13th Professional VMware vBrownbag US edition. Tonight we're going to start off our VCP6 series. Install and configure vSphere 6. Kyle Ruddy is our speaker. Before we get our VCP Learn On, just some quick show notes. You can join in on the conversation using the vBrownbag hashtag. Of course, you can also use the GoToMeeting window as well for any questions or add on to the conversation. Check out our other shows going on around. But one thing I want to point out is our Google Cloud series is going to start on Tuesday, May 26th. So check that out. That's going to be a new series. So it's on an odd night. So be on the lookout for that. You can download any of the podcasts via iTunes or directly from professionalvmware.com. Again, Kyle Ruddy is our speaker. You can catch him on Twitter at Ruddy VCP. I think you need to change that Twitter handle, by the way, Kyle. And I'm your host, Ahmad Yunus. You can catch me on Twitter at Ahmad_Yunus. All right, Kyle. You should now have control.
All right, can everybody see the first screen? Or Ahmad?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so again, I'm Kyle Ruddy, Ruddy VCP on Twitter.
You need to change that.
Yeah, I need to do an upgrade to that. I could probably make it VCAP, or hopefully maybe on the next go round, maybe even look at VCDX. We'll see what the future holds for me. And then also I'm an occasional blogger at thatcouldbeaproblem.com. And be gentle tonight. This is my first time using Google presentation mode, so it will be an experience.
No worries.
All right, so starting off with Objective 1.1, we're going to be looking at the additions available to vSphere 6. There's a bunch of versions, wide variety of features. First off, we're going to be looking at the Essentials kits. These are going to be aimed at the small business level and are limited to vCenter Server Essentials, as well as up to 3 servers with up to 2 procs each. So actually the regular kit's main feature is going to be just the centralized management of your hosts offered through vCenter Essentials. Then the Essentials Plus kit is going to take it a couple steps further, and it's going to allow you for features such as vMotion, which is live migrations from host to host, HA or high availability, which is the monitoring of ESXi hosts and guest OSs at the cluster level to determine failures, thus restarting VMs when necessary. vSphere Data Protection, or VDP. This is an EMC Avamar-backed process that performs agentless VM backups at the image level. vShield Endpoint, which is your antivirus and malware protection, which gets offloaded from the VM itself, and it's applied by way of a module in the kernel. And vSphere Replication. This is your hypervisor-based replication that's able to be applied across multiple storage platforms, as well as offering support for Microsoft VSS and the ability to set VM-level RPOs ranging from 15 minutes up to 24 hours. So with that covered, we're going to look at the core vSphere offerings, which is going to be our Standard, Enterprise, and Enterprise Plus. These are all going to be licensed on a physical proc level, and they all come with vCenter Standard. So starting off with Standard, this is going to get you, again, vMotion. It's going to allow for storage vMotion, which is going to be the live migrations of your backend VM disks and files. HA, VDP, it's going to allow for 2 vCPU fault tolerance, or SMP FT. The SMP stands for Symmetric Multiprocessing. And this is pretty exciting because it's always been limited to a single vCPU in the past. So 2 vCPUs, pretty exciting. And what fault tolerance does is it's basically a shadow copy of a VM that can withstand hardware failures. So you'll have the same VM running on multiple hosts, 2 hosts. You'll have a primary and a secondary. If you happen to lose that primary, the secondary is going to pick right up where the primary left off. So from that point, we're also at vShield endpoint, vSphere replication. Going to add in the hot add of resources. This is going to be your CPU, your RAM, and any other compatible devices. Just make sure to verify that the guest OS supports that functionality. Then there's vVols, which is your virtualization of data stores to apply more refined storage policies at the VM level. Storage Policy-Based Management, or SPBM, which is the VM storage placement, which gets automated by internal policies. Content Library, a centralized repository for items such as ISOs and scripts. And some storage APIs. In this case, actually that VAI belongs on Enterprise, but VASA, which is the vSphere API for storage awareness, which enables awareness of the underlying array information, such as health, config, capacity, thin provisioning, things of that nature.
Hey Kyle, so we had our first question, but I kind of answered, but I wanted to bring it up. So VDPA was supposed to be included as of V6. You want to elaborate a little bit more on that, or?
VDPA.
Yeah, so the advanced data protection was supposed to, they're basically, it used to be a paid edition. Now it's supposed to be part of vSphere 6.
So we're just talking the advanced version, or just VDP?
No, VDPA.
Oh. Huh. So some dynamic capacity growth, dedupe. Scale of up to 8 terabytes. Sorry, I'm actually just reading the page right now. So yeah, that is offered in vSphere 6.
Yep. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to throw you a loop there. So you can blame me for that.
That keeps it interesting.
Yep. All right.
All right, so next up, enterprise version. This is going to add in everything that standard has, as well as some big data extensions. In this case, Hadoop virtual extensions. This is going to allow you to be able to deploy and manage your Hadoop deployments alongside your vSphere environments while taking advantage of things such as HA and fault tolerance against those deployed Hadoop instances. The Virtual Serial Port Concentrator, or VSPC. This is going to allow for the connection of serial ports to VMs, such as physical serial ports, network-based serial ports, or file-based. DRS, which is Distributed Resource Scheduler. This allows for the automated balancing of workloads at the cluster level. And then included with DRS is DPM, or Distributed Power Management, and that's the automated balancing of physical resource availability based upon those DRS levels that are configured. And basically, it allows you to put hosts in a standby mode to save on power and cooling. And then this is where VAI comes into place for the storage APIs. And what VAI is the vSphere API for array integration. And this introduces offloading of items to the array itself, such as block-based copying and zeroing of the array. So, you know, if you're doing vMotions or storage vMotions, that is, all that is offloaded to the array. The host isn't included at all. There's no resource contention happening at the host. All right, so last up in that core offering is going to be Enterprise Plus. It takes everything that Enterprise has, makes some improvements, adds some more stuff in. A couple of the improvements is going to be the vMotion improvements. This is going to allow you to do cross vCenter vMotions as well as long distance vMotions. And I'll go deeper into that here in a second. It's going to allow some fault tolerant improvements, which allows for up to 4 vCPUs. Again, a tremendous improvement on that level. Going to add in storage DRS. That's the automation of VM storage placement, as well as live migrations based upon the workload of a VM's files and/or the array's workload, such as latency or even just data store fullness capacity. Then there's the storage and network I/O control. This is the application of policies to the VMs to guarantee the necessary resources are available. So think of these more as applying SLAs across storage and/or networking. And there's single root I/O virtualization support, or SRIOV. This allows for the ability to offload the I/O processing, with the end goal being network latency being reduced. So vSphere Flash Read Cache, or VFRC. This assigns server-side flash, whether that being SSD or PCIe-based flash, to individual VMs on a VMDK basis, solely for the purpose of read-only caching. Then there's NVIDIA Grid vGPU. This is taking the NVIDIA GPU cycles and splitting them up between multiple VMs to offload that GPU-based processing. Going to add in content library, make some improvements there to allow for template deployments. Distributed switching, always a good one. This is the centralized management of the assigned ESXi hosts vSwitches. However, it also adds in some troubleshooting capabilities such as NetFlow, SNMP, and NetDump. Then there's host profiles. Think of this as config management for your ESXi hosts. So it takes the settings from a reference host and applies them in a one-to-many configuration, and also allows you for the ability to verify that compatibility. Auto deploy, this is the automated server deployment by way of PXE boot, which then installs based upon a centralized image, as well as some host profile assignment. And lastly, integrated OpenStack support for VIO. This is the VMware Integrated OpenStack. This is quite similar to the way that the HVE works, in which case the VIO enables the deployment and management of the OpenStack components alongside a vSphere environment. And last up in the vSphere offerings is the Remote Office Branch Office, or ROBO versions. So these are going to be a little bit different from the Essentials kits in terms of licensing and the features. However, they seem to be compared quite a bit. So ROBO is licensed on a per VM level in packs of 25, and it does come with vCenter Standard. So the ROBO Standard offers things such as vMotion, storage vMotion, high availability, VDP, as well as 2 vCPU fault tolerance, vShield endpoint, vSphere replication, and the resource hot add. Then the advanced version is going to do everything that the standard does. However, it adds in 4 vCPU fault tolerance, gets you your host profiles, your auto deploy, and distributed switching.
So we had Graham chimed in and said profiles don't need maintenance mode now. Yay!
That's a pretty big increase as well. Very nice feature.
Hey Kyle, this is Anthony. I'm jumping in too here. Who's trying to jump on with with the mod earlier. I just had a question about the net dump. What is the net dump that's included in the Enterprise Plus 2? I think that was a feature that you mentioned.
Yep, sorry, the mute button on my microphone is not a clicky. It's just a touch.
Yeah, you don't touch that mute button.
Yeah, I've been warned. So NetDump, it basically allows for a NetDump collector service to transmit some diagnostic information that's received through the distributed switch. So let's see.
And I won't be offended if you tell me to go Google it. I just haven't heard that yet. It's not something I came across in reading about 6, and I'm not running 6 in production, so just curious.
Well, and NetDump's been there in 5 as well.
Okay, all right. I
should
probably do some research then.
However, it's not something that I normally have to use. It's just an option that some of our networking admins have asked for. And
Got it.
I'm always kind of surprised when I can say, yeah, I can do that.
So we do have a question. Since RoboAdvance has VDS, can we deploy NSX on it?
That would be a good question for your SE. I would certainly assume so, but I do not honestly know.
I've never used the Robo feature, so
I mean, you would have to think with, vCenter standard, you have VDS. I mean, most of the components should be there. I mean, you should check all the requirement boxes.
It could be a licensing limitation, maybe. I don't know, but definitely one to mark down and get an answer for. So we'll do that.
Yeah, definitely ask your SE. They will be very happy to talk to you about NSX. All right, so if there's no further questions, we'll keep digging in.
No, man, keep moving.
All right. So going further into some of the new features, going to start off with the content library. Again, that's a centralized repo for things such as your templates, even vApps, ISO images, scripts. The important part is that the libraries can actually be subscribed to, and then items within those libraries have the ability to be published and synced even between multiple vCenters. Then there's the NVIDIA Grid vGPU. So you're getting a dedicated hardware-like experience. So you have direct access to the host GPU, and that's going to be split up. You can split it up into up to, I believe, 8 VMs are supported. So that's pretty cool if you're in a graphical or environment that uses GPU. The vMotion improvements. This is a big deal. So you can now do vMotions between vSwitches, that's standard or distributed switches, going from one to another. And then you can also do vCenters. This includes going from a Windows-based install to the VCSA or the vCenter server appliance. The big thing to keep in mind is that it's all about the round trip time, or RTT is mentioned in all the documentation. Has to be under 150 milliseconds. And then even that number is kind of questionable because some places say 100, others say 150. It seems that 150 is the one that is most cited.
Yeah, I've seen that number. It was originally 100, or it was originally something, and then I thought it even doubled at one point, but the documentation didn't reflect it. That's kind of been a moving target to keep track of. I've kind of been having a hard time trying to figure out where it's actually at.
Yeah, I think it's going to be all about testing and how it works in your environment. And being able to move, just in between the vSwitches is a pretty big deal for my environments, and vCenters is going to be pretty awesome too. But the round trip time, that's going to be the interesting, going from one vCenter to another. Would definitely be interesting. All right, so then vVols. I'm going to keep this to a high level and just say that they're taking these storage APIs to the next level, virtualizing the data stores and allowing for a VM level and even VMDK level management. Highly recommend you checking out the vBrownbag series on vVols that Rawlinson did a couple weeks back. It's a two-parter. Whole lot of good information there. And it's one of my resource links as well, because it's coming and it's pretty exciting.
So as far as the vMotion stuff, the official number was 150 when they GA'd. They increased it from 100 to 150.
Nice. All right, moving on to Objective 1.2, looking at the install options for vSphere. So with vSphere 6, they're introducing the PSC, or the Platform Services Controller. Now this is pretty important because it's going to take on the responsibility for single sign-on, or SSO. It's also going to do your licensing as well as certificate management. And the certificate management piece is known as VMCA. Now the important part about VMCA is that it's going to act as a root CA and issue signed certs to all the vSphere 6 components. So what this does is it effectively replaces self-signed certs. However, if your domain already has a root CA in it, the VMCA can also be configured as a subordinate CA and still be issuing those self-signed certs within your root level domain. So another key piece of what PSC brings to the table is the ability to replicate the licensing amongst all the other PSCs within the environment, as well as your VI roles, permissions, and even your tags. So if you're thinking about it and you're familiar with linked mode, the PSC replication that's taking place actually replaces linked mode automatically as long as your vCenters are in the same SSO domain. So there's no more worrying about having to do linked mode or not having to do linked mode, or having to think about any of the dependencies they're in with linked mode. So that's pretty cool as well. All right, so the actual vCenter install, still have your Windows-based vCenter. You can do that with the embedded PSC, or you can do that with the external PSC. Then you have your vCenter server appliance. That as well can be done with the embedded PSC or the external PSC. So during the install process, there's always a question as to environment size. And this question was asked repeatedly in years past and versions past. However, it's been formalized now across all of the major VMware releases, and most notably, at least in my case, for vCenters and vRealize operations. So what they're doing is they're going to classify it as tiny, small, medium, and large. So tiny is going to be your 10 hosts and 100 VMs. Small is going to be your 100 hosts and 1,000 VMs, so they're increasing it by 10. Medium is going to increase that by 4, up to 400 hosts or 4,000 VMs. Then you're going to finish off with large being 1,000 hosts and 10,000 VMs. So sizing-wise, we're going to start off with an easy one. Your external PSC instance, Since this has no dependencies on your environment size, it's always going to request 2 CPU, 2 gigs of RAM, and 30 gigs of disk. Then moving forward and looking at your Windows-based vCenter install, your OS level is going to be Windows Server 2008 R2 or newer. In 2012, R2 is supported as well. It's actually what I'm going to be demoing here in just a second. So your environment size, 2x8, 2 CPU, 8 gigs of RAM, 60 gigs worth of disk, including PSC. Small is going to double that to a 4x16, 100 gigs of disk. Medium's 8x24, still keeping that 100 gig disk size. Large is going to top out at 16x32. So the database options is where it gets interesting. Key point there is SQL Express is no more. It's actually going to be replaced by the onboard Postgres instance. And if you are currently going to be upgrading a vCenter instance that has SQL Express in use, it actually gets migrated over to a Postgres instance. Now that Postgres instance supports up to 20 hosts and 200 VMs, so it's pretty SQL Express-like. Then there's also Microsoft SQL support. It's going to be 08R2, 2012, and 2014. And then your Oracle databases are 11G and 12C for those supported versions. Now the VCSA and PSC, they're both deployed in a similar manner, both by way of a scripted web-based deployment. I will also be demoing that part. Sizing-wise, CPU and RAM requirements are all identical to the Windows-based install. However, since the database is going to generally be on board with the Postgres instance, the disk requirements are a bit higher. So Tiny starts it off right around 120 gigs. Small kicks it a little bit up to 140 gigs. Medium takes a big jump up to 275 gigs. And then large finishes out right around 325. And then while I'm saying that it's generally going to be Postgres, the VCSA still supports your Oracle 11G or 12C databases. However, it should be noted that that's going to be deprecated in future versions.
So there's no more SQL Express either on the Windows side, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Going to be replaced by that onboard Postgres instance.
Yep. And you can actually mix and match your vCenters now, so you can have an appliance connecting to a window or vice versa, right?
Correct, yep. All right, demo time. Finally, some interactive stuff. However, after saying that, since both of the installs are kind of time intensive, I'm just going to be doing the initial install piece. We're going to be looking at an external PSC deployment as well as the Windows OS-based vCenter install.
You did sacrifice something to the demo gods, right?
Of course, always.
Okay.
I don't want to have to live up to that tweet earlier.
Meet Murphy. I'm just playing.
Oh, so you say. All right, so hopefully you can see my RDP session here to a 2012 R2 box. The vCenter installer, much simplified now. You don't have the option to install all the services separately. It's all or nothing. So moving forward off the vCenter server install window, I'm going to go through, prep that, hit your EULA. Of course, everybody reads that every time. I mean, who doesn't? So then on the Windows side, you're going to have the option to do your vCenter server and embedded PSC. just a PSC or just the vCenter server. In this case, we're going to do it with the embedded, just to kind of demo what that looks like. System name, it automatically fills that in from DNS, so DNS is still an important piece. I'm currently using the system that is on DHCP, so it yells. Go through, set up your SSO domain, assuming that you don't already have one created. And site name, that can be whatever you want it to be. Normally something more descriptive than default first site. Application of your service account. Even my lab environment uses a vCenter service account. And then this is what Ahmad was talking about earlier. Your embedded database, no longer SQL Express, goes straight to a Postgres instance. However, in this case, I've set up a SQL Server, I believe 2012 instance. So I'm going to kick it off to an external database. Checking out all your common ports. Most of those have stayed the same, I believe. At least all the important ones. Install file locations. Now you don't have to worry about the web client not working if you install it into a different drive than the C drive.
Oh, really? You've tested that?
Well, you don't have the option anymore. It's not a standalone service anymore. It forces you.
I haven't deployed the Windows vCenter. I've only done the appliance, and I'm happy with the appliance, so no more Windows for me.
I am very happy with the appliance as well. I actually had not installed a 6.0 version until being asked to do this. Which, I mean, it's a whole lot nicer than 5.5 was, so major props to them on improving that process. So on the last page, just goes through, gives you a high-level overview of everything that you configured in the last couple screens. Hit install, let it rip. In my environment, in my home lab, it takes about 30 minutes, which isn't too bad. So the PSC and VCSA, what this is, it's an ISO that you download now. So you mount the ISO. There's a VCSA setup. It's literally an HTML page. One of the things to note that when you're doing the install, prior to the actual install process, you're going to need to install this client integration plugin 4.6.0. It's good to note because it's going to make you restart your browser if you install it, so don't get too far ahead in any process or have any open tabs that you desire to have open during the install.
So, just curious, your personal preference, one or the other, and why? Windows versus appliance, they're both same feature sets. Other than having less experience maybe with Linux, which one would you choose and why?
So personally, that would really depend on what plugins you need. So the only things that I've really run into that the VCSA can't do is stuff like vCloud Air. I can't get the plugin to work for that. On the Windows side, it works. So you probably should check on what plugins you need to work with your vCenter. I can say that NSX does work with the appliance. Trying to think of any other ones that I've run into that don't. so far it's just been vCloud error for me. And that may be user error. I don't want to say that that won't work for anybody else, but just my instance.
Yeah, some of the comments I'm seeing are more related to plugins than anything. And of course, the VUM still dependent on Windows, but my personal opinion is I always break out VUM anyway on its own VM, so that removes the need for me needing a Windows vCenter.
Well, you know, if you do auto deploy, you don't really need VUM. You just update your image.
Don't get me started with auto deploy.
Oh, I love auto deploy. Auto deploy is awesome. I reboot the host, it comes back up, it's all patched. Everything is good. Now, when it doesn't work, it really doesn't work.
I've got some small and medium-sized businesses on, you know, using the appliance, and what I end up doing is if they have like a Windows update server, I'll throw VUM on there, you know, just make sure there's no port conflicts or anything. But that seems to work well in the SMB world. If you can just spare a server with some extra space and toss it on there. Otherwise, I mostly deploy the actual appliance because it works for the majority of the SMB world.
Oh yeah, it's ridiculously easy to configure. I mean, it's like 5 nexts and a couple credentials. I mean, that's it. You don't have to worry about wondering which ODBC connector you need, or messing with your DBA team, or if you are the DBA, you don't have to go through modify roles and permissions, and it's all integrated. It's all in one. Hopefully they take it down the path that VROps has gone down, where they're actually splitting out the services and making those more highly available. That would be pretty nice. So
I actually just got a reply back from Twitter from Rob Nolan, VCDX 178, about the Robo Advance allowing use of NSX, and he says yes, it does. So there you go.
That's interesting. That could allow for some interesting layer 2 splits and doing that over long range, and good stuff. All right, so demo, VCSA / PSC in this instance. You're on essentially a web page. This is literally Internet Explorer, so it works on anything. Accept the EULA, dump in your host IP or FQDN. Credentials for it. And only thing to note so far is if you're using a distributed switch, you have to dump it off to an ephemeral port group. Static and dynamic do not work for some reason that I am unsure of, but if you try and do it, it definitely breaks.
I think it's a bug. So here it goes through. I actually like this, that it actually will not allow you to pass unless everything gets validated.
Yeah, its checking is pretty awesome. I'm very happy with it.
I wish other VMware products would do this as well.
And Mike piped in too on the questions, and he said Chris Wall had a good article on why you want it on ephemeral, but I'll have to look that up, and maybe I can post that for everybody to take a look at. Mike, you got a link for that at all, or? I'll race you to it. How's that?
So once you get past the host requirements, so you've hit the host, you can log in. It sees the proper things, get your proper check marks. Name and standard credentials. Note that the complexity is taken pretty far as the password. So special characters, numbers, lowercase, uppercase, at least 8 characters, and apparently no more than 20. And similar to the Windows version, you're given the option for vCenter with embedded, just the PSC, or just the vCenter. So, if you want the appliance to run all off on its own, it can do it. So for this demo, we're doing PSC. Since I'm assuming that the other installer hasn't gotten far enough, we'll create a new SSO. The username is still going to be administrator, so there's still that. That's a constant. Still have the password complexity requirements for SSO. However, if you really don't like those password complexity requirements, you can go into SSO and change them. You can make it as light or as difficult as you want. Give it an SSO name and site name. So being able to customize that as far as your domain name, very cool. And going back to the sizing, doesn't matter what your environment size is. It's going to be 2 vCPU, 2 gigs of RAM, 30 gigs of disk. There, we're going to dump this off to my Synology NFS mount. So in this case, I'm DHCP. VMware products really do not like that. However, they will at least let you go through. And allows for customization of your NTP server. Enable SSH is an option that you have. In my limited use, I have not needed to SSH in once, so you should probably take that as a use case by use case scenario situation. Again, the warning because I'm using DHCP, which is basically a reminder that hopefully your DNS is really solid. So as with the Windows deployment, it goes back through, shows you everything that you just went through. For confirmation, hit finish, and it goes.
So it was commented too that in the fully qualified domain name, in the past you were stuck with vSphere.local as your your SSO domain. And Mike brought up that you can use, and correct me if I'm wrong too, I think you can use any domain name that you want as long as it's not the same like Windows domain name. So you could make lab.local or whatever you want instead of vSphere.local. Is that still true?
Yes, correct. Still true. And yeah, just as a general best practices, I would not name it the same as your actual domain, Windows domain.
Exactly.
Just because you don't want to create a local SSO user and then it try and authenticate it. You have temp.local as your SSO domain, and temp.local is your actual domain where all your AD auth is. If you put in administrator, you might get your local SSO account. You might get your domain admin.
What could go wrong, right?
I know. Everybody likes playing with their luck from time to time. That's why I do live demos. Haven't failed me yet. Knock on wood. All right, with vCenter stuff out of the way, objective 1.3 is looking at the installation of ESXi itself. So starting with the install process, bare minimum hardware requirements. It's going to be 2 CPU cores. So that's not physical procs, that is just cores itself. 4 gigs of RAM. Anything less, the install will error out and not allow you to go forward. A 1 gig Ethernet adapter and a gig disk. However, you should really think about increasing that to at least 5.2 gigs a disk. That is the minimum that you need to hit in order to create a very small VMFS partition as well as a scratch partition. Now you can, once you build it, if you do it with less than 5.2, you can tell the scratch partition to live anywhere else. However, if you don't configure that, it's going to offload it to the host RAM disk. And so what the scratch partition does is it's essentially a log storage location for stuff like VM support bundles. So if it's on the RAM disk, you reboot, you lose all that information. You lose all your logging that was stored there. So that could be kind of important. So looking at the actual installation modes, 3 main modes. This is going to be your interactive mode, which you're booting from a CD or USB drive and just following it through the prompts. Scripted option is still there, still awesome if you hate auto deploy like some of our hosts feel. So on the scripted install, you're still booting from a CD or USB drive. Then you're hitting the installer boot options, and you can either manually point it to a Kickstarter file, or you can modify the boot config file itself in the ISO when you create it, and point that at a file that can be on the ISO itself. Lastly, auto deploy. I still love it. This is PXE booting, installing based off of a centralized image, then applying the host profile. And some references there as far as install and config. So next couple things that we go over, we're also going to be doing that against a lab, so trying to make this as interactive as possible. Some of the important stuff we're going to be looking at, which is the configuration of routing. You can do this by way of the user interface against the host itself. So in my environment, I'm using a virtualized ESXi host, so if I mess it up too bad, blow it away, bring it back, it's all good. During the install process, it is going to force you to set a password with certain complexity requirements. However, I did find out, based upon prepping this, that if you do the reset system config, wipes the password. So you can technically have a blank password. Not prescribed. Anyway, so setting your route configuration, in my case, we're using DHCP. However, just go down to the default gateway, modify that to whatever it needs to be. So I just changed it to 10. I'm on the same layer too, so we're all good from that aspect. However, that brings me to the next part, so that we can show off doing this through the CLI. In this case, I'm SSH'd into the host itself. So we'll do some ESX CLI magic here. We're going to be looking for the route config that's associated to the IPv4 network. I'm going to do a list command against that. So it really did error out and not allow me to set that to 10. Okay. However, to verify what this is doing, we can actually go ahead, just remove it altogether. So we're removing the named network that is default with the gateway that's set to 192.168.1.254. Verify that's gone. Poof. So then to add it in case that you're in a static IP environment, go back through to ESXi network IP route IPv4. Want to do the add command. This is going to be your default route, so name it your default, and then give it your gateway. Boom, it's back. If you happen to be able to connect to your host even without the routing being set, you can log into it through the vSphere client. So even they still have an actual thick client. You still can connect to hosts. You can still connect to your vCenters. Just know that anything new, you're not going to be able to set. So you're not going to be able to do like your vSphere flash read cache. That's pretty much been the biggest one, and it's going to apply the same kind of things to your VM level hardware settings. However, that is not what we're discussing about today. So routing wise, config tab, go down to software and look at your DNS and routing. Then you're going to hit the routing tab right there. That's where you're going to set your default gateway. All right, up next, NTP. The easiest way that I have found to do it is going through the thick client. Go through to the time configuration that's still on the configuration tab. Hit options. So you're going into your NTP configuration options. NTP settings, add in one of your NTP servers, and it kicked that off to another screen. And then change your startup policy to be whatever it is that's compliant for your environment.
We had a question come in on Twitter. I don't mean to bring it back a couple pages, but it was about resources and what you need to install ESXi. The question was, in 5.5, you can install it on 4 gigs and then lower it to 2 gigs later. Can you still do that with 6?
That is a very good question.
Labs and such?
I do not know. I would assume that if you get rid of the partitions, you probably would be able to do it. I guess it depends on what you're trying to gain by installing it to a larger subset of disks and then reducing the size.
Well, it required 4 before, and then you could get it on 4, but then shrink it down to 2, and it would still run. So I don't know if that the question was, can you still do that on version 6?
It's a good question. So I know that you can go through and you can reduce the RAM settings. So you just have to have 4 gigs when it's created.
I'm an idiot. Yep, you're correct. Yeah, not disks, RAM.
Okay.
He piped in on Twitter and corrected me, and so he must be listening. And then somebody requested, or somebody answered in questions. They're talking about RAM, and yes, you can, because somebody has done it. So apparently it does work. So, sorry I screwed that question up for you.
Well, no, and if nothing else, I mean, you can still go through and apply the memory restrictions to it as well, so that it never actually uses that much RAM. So that's another option. So at least it thinks it sees 4 gigs. It just can't use more than whatever's configured. So NTP-wise, there's some other options. You can do it through VI config. Not something that I've done myself. I'm a big ESX CLI guy, big power CLI guy. You can go through and modify your what is it? Add VM host NTP server. You can add servers that way, and then you can modify your processes to start, stop, and configure the process through, I believe it's VM host service.
I've actually seen people leave this blank or not use it, or it drives me bonkers. Why wouldn't you use, some sort of, NTP configuration? But I don't know. Some people don't feel like it's reliable. I think it's your time source that's not reliable.
And there's going to be, at least from what I've seen, quite a few things are fairly reliant upon NTP.
Yeah, your logs.
So I would not skip it. Oh yeah, logs number one. You send off a log bundle to support and you try and tell them what time it is. Yeah, you might get some interesting responses based off of that.
Yeah.
One thing before I standardize it in our procedures at my workplace, but we moved a domain controller, now domain time is wrong, and it was like years off, and now you have your primary domain controller and your time is wrong because your host is wrong. And
years off. Are you time traveling?
Apparently, yeah. And it turns out Active Directory doesn't like to time travel. So just make sure you set your NTP, because that's kind of super important. At least, like Graham said, it may not be reliable, but it should be consistent, or at least it's consistently long. So at least it's consistent. You don't want too big of a gap between the two. So that's just my 2 cents.
All right, and last big thing, DNS configuration. Yeah, time is important, DNS is important.
Forward and reverse.
Yes, do not neglect either one of those. Both are very important. So first up, go through the DCUI directly on the host terminal itself. We're back into the configure management area. Then you have your primary, alternate, and host name. Those are all can be set there. So another option is going to be, get my cursor back. Going back to ESX CLI. So we're looking into the network area for the DNS server list. Helps if I spell server correctly. So right now we just have the router. So we'll go ahead and add in one of my domain controllers. So with that, we're doing the same command as before. However, we're doing an add, and then it's an S follow server for S, and then your IP address. So one last thing, and to go back to NTP, I am unaware of any way that you can actually force NTP to update itself. I believe it's on a 15-minute interval where it updates all on its own. From some of the testing that I've done, starting, stopping, restarting the service doesn't really indicate anything. It's pretty much all on its own. So hence why my time is still red right there. And
the only thing I found is
2012. So
is rebooting.
Nice.
At this point, I usually give it a manual kick and, you know, like manually set it and then just make sure NTT is set. But, yeah, I've always wondered if there was any way to manually kick it and make sure it could do that. But it's good to know I'm not the only one that hasn't figured that out yet.
No, very unfortunately not. I banged my head against that wall for a little while last night trying to, and I swear there was a way. Nope, I'm pretty certain there's not. So DNS, there is the DNS and routing area that we were in before. However, instead of going to the routing tab, you stay on the main DNS config area. And then you have your preferred DNS, as well as the ability to add in the search domains.
Your domain looks like attlocal.net. For some reason, I read that really quick and thought AT&T.
Well, it's a Uverse domain that hands out all my DHCP stuff.
Oh, well, then it is AT&T.
It is.
It's been a long day.
I certainly don't work for AT&T, so it's not that.
So you're not promoting Uverse right now, is that what you're saying?
I'll plead the fifth. I'm doing better than Frapp is right now, but I'm not going to promote it. Definitely pleading the fifth.
Hey, I just when I lived in Texas, I had Uverse, and I really didn't have any issues.
No, it's consistent. I will give them that. So last cool thing, show off. I'm having to assume that we are somewhere near our 1 hour time limit, and I'm certain we're past our 9:30 or 8:30 Central Time. So if you have SSH access to it, you've ever sat there and thought, man, I wish I could get to the DCUI. Literally type in DCUI. Boom, it's there. Fully functioning, everything works. Same thing is going into the GUI, it's just grayscale.
All right, stupid question, and this is me asking, is that new or could you do that in previous versions too?
You can do that in previous versions.
Yeah, it's been around for a little while. It's just not something that's publicized. But I think it's cool.
I learned. Today I learned. Thank you.
Now show them how to now show them how to get out of it.
Control C.
Control C, yeah.
Oh, that's easy enough.
Or
Mike said F1 takes you to shell on the DUI screen too.
Yep.
Or Alt F1.
Yep.
That one I knew. I just didn't know you could get to DCUI from the shell. Cool.
And then another kind of buggy thing that I found, which, I mean, it's, I guess not buggy since it's probably unsupported, but at least in PuTTY, if you resize the screen, it also kicks you back out. So, a couple little bits of coolness.
So you're saying that's going to be an exam question?
Hey, never know.
What are 2 ways to exit DCUI from the SSH shell? 1, resize, and 2, Control C.
You might get bonus points just for knowing that you can get to it through SSH. All right, so that's all I got. That's our objectives 1.1, 2, and 3.
Awesome. So, any more questions, comments? Good job, man, for the first time.
Thank you. There's no pressure at all.
So you'll come back and do this next week, right?
Oh, something tells me that that I would be signed up one way or the other.
You're welcome.
I'm telling you, it's me and Dan Barr. We're gonna do some Russian roulette style vBrownbagging.
I don't know. Mike Wilson is also going to be presenting, I think, June 3rd or something. So there's a lot of first timers.
Nice. It's always good to see.
All right. If there's no more questions, I'm going to cut off the recording.